President Trump makes his first move to shuffle things up in his administration. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz is moving to the United Nations. We've got the American conservatives' Curt Mills here to discuss what it means for the national security team. The Financial Times of London is predicting an end to American hegemony. We disagree, and Kara McKinney is here to tell us whether we are right. FBI agents who took a knee during the BLM hysteria are being reassigned. FBI whistleblower Steve Friend will assess the progress being made at the Bureau. All that and more next on the Matt Gaetz Show. Let's do this. We're shaking up Washington, D.C. We're breaking the fever.
You ever watch this guy on television? It's like a machine. He's great. Matt Gaetz.
Right now, the key feature of President Trump's legislative agenda is being debated on Capitol Hill. Trump isn't breaking his needs to Congress down into bite-sized pieces. He isn't passing different bills to impact different agencies of government. He wants one big, beautiful bill. That means border security, extending his tax cuts, and spending reform must all happen in one legislative deliverable. I wonder if Trump's strategy is informed by what happened during his last term. Trump put enormous political capital into reforming health care. Those reforms would have engaged the states to modernize, innovate, and find more cost-effective solutions in their Medicaid program. Instead, John McCain voted no. Trump then had to reconstitute his legislative efforts to pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which jolted the economy out of a slumber, but which also expires at the end of this year. If the tax cuts are not extended, individual tax rates will go up, corporate tax rates will become the highest in the world again, the doubling of the standard deduction will dissolve, and the child tax credit will be halved. Everything will get more costly and complicated when it comes to expensing and filing your taxes. Some House Republicans would like to see the bulk of President Trump's executive orders put up for a vote to be placed into permanent law. Here's Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna of Florida with an update on those talks.
So I actually stopped Speaker Johnson on the floor today and I asked him, I said, look, we are getting a lot of questions. Obviously, and rightfully so, it's been the first 100 days. I feel like we haven't really done much, and the American people feel the same way in regards to codifying President Trump's agenda and getting this stuff written in stone so that a next administration can't easily come in and reverse course. And he did inform me that the White House congressional legislation team came over. They actually went through, prioritized the executive orders that President Trump has signed into law. Mind you, it's been over 100, so there's been a ton of them. And we are going to start the rollouts on those votes in the upcoming weeks.
Tax cuts must be lashed to spending cuts. Elon Musk put it this way yesterday. There's a long way to go, he said. It's pretty difficult. It's like, how much pain is the cabinet and Congress willing to take? It can be done, but it requires dealing with a lot of complaints. Doge leaders said they've cut about 1% of the federal workforce, or about 20,000 people. Medicaid is primarily a target for spending cuts, much in the way the prior reforms would have allowed states to be able to optimize the funds spent in the program. Now, Medicaid has provided health coverage to approximately 83 million low-income Americans in this last year. It had federal expenditures of $618 billion and is projected to grow by 60% over the next decade. That is totally unsustainable. Republican proposals include work requirements for able-bodied adults aged 19 to 55 without dependents, potentially reducing the enrollment by about 1.5 million people. That could save north of $100 billion. Significant reforms to federal student aid are also under consideration. Proposals include eliminating subsidized undergraduate loans, capping graduate and Parent Plus loans, and consolidating repayment options. Pell Grant eligibility would be limited to students taking at least 6 credit hours. If you aren't taking at least 6 credit hours, are you even in school? It could punish those taking less than 15 credit hours. The GOP aims to rescind approximately $565 billion in green energy incentives enacted under the Biden administration, including provisions from the Inflation Reduction Act, which only caused more inflation. This move aligns with efforts to reduce federal spending and shift energy priorities so energy is cheaper as a key input in everything that we buy and need. The proposed cuts have sparked divisions within the Republican Party. Centrist and swing district Republicans have expressed concern behind closed doors over the deep reductions in programs like Medicaid. They shouldn't. They should back these cuts if they have any hope for America to be able to overcome the rising costs of these programs. but indeed it's still driving some negotiation that's ongoing. Conversely, fiscal conservatives and members of the House Freedom Caucus advocate for more substantial cuts to spending programs so that we can have long-term fiscal balance. That fiscal balance can only be achieved by rejecting the inflationary spending we saw erupt during the Biden-Harris failed era of America. The former vice president stoked further speculation that she will run for California governor with a keynote speech in San Francisco last night. She called the Trump agenda a high-velocity event, decades in the making.
What we are in fact witnessing is a high-velocity event where a vessel is being used for the swift implementation of an agenda that has been decades in the making.
We wonder whether Kamala Harris even knows what a high-velocity event looks like. After all, she used to spend her days with this guy. Not exactly the picture of high velocity. The only thing high velocity about Kamala's politics was the high velocity used to jettison Joe Biden from the nomination he won so she could lose to Trump in his place. Trump is now having to restore the American economy and indeed the world. He's putting the pieces of Humpty Dumpty back together again, and it may take some time. But the answer to get America back on track wasn't more Joe or Kamala. It wasn't more spending, more war, higher prices, and surrender in trade. We'll see if so much harm can be undone by one big, beautiful bill. Today, we saw a shakeup on President Trump's national security team. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz has been replaced in that role by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who now will serve in like 3 different jobs: Secretary of State, USAID, and National Security Advisor. Waltz will likely stay in the administration. He'll be nominated to the position of United States Ambassador to the UN. There's no surprise that within the Trump administration, there are differences of opinion regarding foreign policy. That's healthy. That's productive. The bright side of the Houthi Signal group chat release was our ability to see some really smart people work through issues deliberately. Vice President J.D. Vance presented what we believed were really smart questions in that discussion regarding the need for Europe to be more involved in defending their own interests. Folks like Mike Waltz have a history of being more hawkish. So what does the move of Mike Waltz to a key post at the United Nations mean for the national security team? Joining us now, Executive Director of the American Conservative magazine, Curt Mills. So, Curt, what do you make of the shakeup on the national security team?
I would say it was nigh inevitable, but Trump took his time. I think they're going to try to make an argument effectively that it wasn't related to Signalgate, but I think the die was cast on Waltz no matter what. I think it's pretty remarkable that they moved him over to Turtle Bay. So they seem very committed, the administration, that they, not to give the media that they had a scalp here. But the reality is that Trump has seemed to relegate people within his circle that he doesn't want to hear too much from to New York. Of course, first was Nikki Haley, followed by Elise Stefanik, who they withdrew because of the tight margins in the House. And then finally, they're going to send Waltz to New York. And it's clearly a demotion. Anyone who's familiar with the White House knows that that office is basically the best in the entire White House, with the exception of the Oval Office. That's how Henry Kissinger wanted it during the Nixon years. And, sending him to New York is a clear ejection.
I wonder what it does to the makeup of the team dynamic, because we've obviously seen a portion of the national security team really favor direct kinetic conflict and war with Iran. J.D. Vance seems to be more strategic, wanting to see Europe play a larger role where their interests are at play. And that was kind of the magic of the Houthi group chat, right? It gave us visibility into this very smart, thoughtful discussion. Waltz was clearly on the hawkish side of that and now goes to a different role. Do you think we see the consequence of that shift in the makeup of the team or in the outputs?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think. And so contra the controversy with the Pentagon, which I think is simply an operational tragedy and travesty, frankly, with the NSC's shakeup, you see clear elements of ideology. It was not just Waltz who was ousted. It was this key deputy, Alex Wong, who is a Tom Cotton, the senator, and Mitt Romney alumni. The NSC was sort of derisively within administration circles referred to as the neoconservative Security Council. Waltz was a hawkish outlier within his own ranks, and you're going to see a clear shakeup here. Now, that's no guarantee that a successor will necessarily be different, but even within, Rubio himself, the Secretary of State, and now the acting NSA, Rubio himself has obviously ideologically morphed in a way that Waltz never really did. Waltz signaled his allegiance to Trump, but only perhaps for his own interests. This is a clear philosophical shift at the NSC.
And it is interesting to see Secretary of State Rubio adorn, I guess, his fourth hat. He's the archivist, he's the Secretary of State, he's the head of USAID, and he's now the National Security Advisor. What should we make of that organizational construct?
Well, there's some precedent. Kissinger served as both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, and there was some talk actually of Pompeo assuming such a role when John Bolton was ousted in September of 2019. So this is not out of left field. The question is if this even particularly desirable for Rubio. I wouldn't say that Rubio at the current time is a particularly strong Secretary of State. Again, of course, within Trump world, you might not want to be as strong anything because you could attract negative attention. It's a fine line, right? Like Vance doesn't want to be too strong. He doesn't want to be Dick Cheney. He wants to be more like Obama's, maybe Biden's, the powerful vice president who becomes president. Again, Rubio right now, I think, has seen his responsibility amplified, but not necessarily his authority.
Rubio was always labeled a hawk, but I never saw it behind closed doors. I mean, even when you had Bolton and others pushing for an invasion of Venezuela back during President Trump's first term, I remember vividly then Senator Rubio laying out the real costs of such an adventure and the likely drawbacks. And so I think it's actually great that he's here and functioning in this role. But you've noticed how the media has tried to denigrate anyone who is a foreign policy realist by saying, well, Michael Waltz was the adult in the room. And I don't say this as a criticism of Michael Waltz, but these are all very accomplished people. They're all adults in the room. You made the point to me back during President Trump's first term that you believed wherever there was treachery against Trump that emerged from his own administration, you could usually use foreign policy as a litmus test. And if someone was a foreign policy realist, they were likely going to be more durably loyal. If they weren't, that you had the Bolton and John Kelly and Mattis phenomenon of turning on Trump. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think the reality is that, number one, in the 2016 primary, Trump changed the Republican Party in a number of ways. But what you saw the conservative establishment vomited all over itself over was first and foremost foreign policy. The Weekly Standard types, Bill Kristol, and the National Review types were most animated by what Trump was saying, which was to say we need to dump the Bush baggage and we need to change the party on foreign policy. Number one. Number two, the reality is, of course, President Trump has a ambitious domestic agenda. Almost any president will, but domestic politics is hard versus we have an imperial presidency. For better or worse, on military affairs. And the president can do things like that. We could have a war in Iran tomorrow, or we could have a deal. And it's basically, and has, I think, roughly been since at least the Nixon administration, ultimately on the decisions and the decision-making of one person.
What would you define the Trump doctrine in his second term? And do you think it deviates at all on foreign policy from his first term?
I don't know if Trump himself has changed. He's just become more unrestrained in his own instincts. So yes, the administration is different. So you don't see the H.R. McMasters, you don't see the John Boltons, you don't see the Rex Tillersons, you don't see the John Kellys, and all of those people are different. But I think what you see here is clear, unrestrained nationalism. Contra the attacks, I think, a lot of times on Trump and perhaps fellow travelers, that he's an isolationist. In a lot of ways, he's not an isolationist at all. He wants a clearly enhanced dominion in North America. So that's why you see the designs on Greenland and Panama and perhaps the half-jesting designs on Canada. And I think you see clear desire to get out of extraneous theaters, i.e. the Middle East, but also not necessarily courting direct kinetic war in East Asia, where with Taiwan. I mean, Trump's own rhetoric on Taiwan has been more restrained than Biden's, who committed troops before a war even occurred. So I think that's clearly the doctrine you see. I think the Middle East is tough because Trump is in a bit of a straitjacket with the Netanyahu government. But I think again and again, I think Netanyahu might have not necessarily gotten what he wanted here. You've seen a lot of Israeli designs stalled early in this administration, 101 days in, and I think Trump, again, with the Iran talks, is desire to pursue national interest above all else and be pretty blunt and uncompromising on that. I mean, all presidents are going to make the case that we need to pursue national interests, but they often don't. And Trump is going to be quite direct and even rude about it. And we're about to see what happens.
Well, sure, and from others, we've heard that our national interest can be found digging around in a Central Asian cave, when I'm not so sure that's the case. And it seems that the foreign policy realists are rising, and that those who are part of the siren song for war, they just get a little softer and a little further away. Curt Mills, Executive Director of the American Conservative, thanks so much for joining me again on the program.